Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, September 29th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about a brand new poll from the state of Wisconsin, from Fabrizio Lee & Associates and others that released this through the AARP, which is a nonpartisan group that tends to poll states to gauge how people are standing on certain issues, specifically voters 50 plus, but in that tune release results for the 2022 midterm elections and look at many states beyond Wisconsin, such as Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, among others. Now, the reason why this poll is so significant is because it shows that in the Senate race, Ron Johnson, the incumbent Republican senator, is leading by 5 points statewide. This is a big change from the polls that we had seen prior to that had shown Mandela Barnes, the incumbent lieutenant governor of the state, leading against Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson is exceptionally disapproved across the state, but that doesn't seem to matter too much to voters across it when it comes down to the general election. They may disapprove of Ron Johnson, but may also approve of his re-election. It's a weird dynamic. It's one that has been going on in Wisconsin since 2010. In 2016, he was one of the lowest ranked senators when it came down to approval, yet won re-election by 3 points, and it looks like he's on track to do exactly that. The Democrats nominated Mandela Barnes, who is a progressive Democrat from the state who had been elected alongside Tony Evers back in 2018. Now, there's a lot of consideration here about whether or not Mandela Barnes is a weak nominee, as someone who is a bad candidate for the Democratic Party, and for a while he was significantly outperforming expectations. But as we've gotten closer to the final time of the election season, as we nearly just 1 month out until the general election, it has become more apparent that yes, Mandela Barnes did have baggage, and with that baggage did ultimately harm his candidacy for this Senate election. But unlike like any other politician across the country, he came with any type of baggage that would get someone to the position of being lieutenant governor. Mandela Barnes is not an exceptionally bad candidate for the Democratic Party, and realistically speaking, this race should have never even been competitive. Ron Johnson should have been guaranteed re-election from the moment that he decided to rerun. The Republican Party, I think, very much saw this race as an insured race, one they would not have to worry about, and with a last-minute fund, and I say this truly and honestly speaking, you can look at the campaign finances. With a last-minute push and allocation of funds to the Wisconsin Senate race, we now see a change in trajectory. The Democrats were out fundraising Ron Johnson, the Democrats were outpacing Ron Johnson, and for a while, that's what was working. When you look at the Wisconsin polls from FiveThirtyEight, you will see that on average, Mandela Barnes led for about 2 months straight. Up until recently, it got closer and closer, and now Ron Johnson ultimately leads by 0.5% statewide. According to Real Clear Politics, that lead is even larger. We can take a look at the polls here showing Ron Johnson ahead by 2 points across the state of Wisconsin. Honestly, something that I would say is quite impressive, but also something that we very much could have expected and would have predicted just maybe a few months ago. I think also what we have to understand is that Mandela Barnes came into this with, again, an unexpected level of support, approval, etc. across the state of Wisconsin. He was not meant to be the nominee at first. He was not meant to be the one that was ensured this election, and the Democrats haven't even funneled money into this race to the extent that they have practically anywhere else. Chuck Schumer and the National Democrats seem to have avoided this race, and honestly, it made sense. It made sense initially speaking, because Ron Johnson has had such a lucky track record, and it looks like he is this time around as well. Looking at this poll from the AARP, we find that not only on the Senate level does Ron Johnson have a lead, but also Tim Michels in the Wisconsin governor's race. It doesn't help that neither of these two top Democrats are performing to maximum capacity likely being where we saw the Democrats back in 2020 and some Democrats back in 2018. Now, to be fair, Tony Evers didn't win his governor's race with the majority of the vote back in 2018. He won with a plurality of the vote, but regardless, he still was able to oust incumbent Governor Scott Walker, someone who was ensured re-election for quite some time, up until the time that the general election came around. But to see this incumbent governor being at a point where he's losing 3 points amongst all likely voters tells me everything that I need to know about the state of the race right now, that Tony Evers is in fact behind when it comes down to the governor's race, at least according to this poll. Looking at the numbers in Real Clear Politics, Tony Evers overall has a lead of 1.4%, but it actually gets worse for the Democratic Party when you compare the governor polling and the Senate polling, because similar to AARP, Tim Michels, the Republican nominee for governor, is performing worse than Senator Ron Johnson. And you can find that in quite literally all of these polls. PPP, Public Policy Polling, Trafalgar, Emerson, Spectrum News, and Siena College, Marquette University. You take a look at the numbers that you find here as well. What do you see? Ron Johnson leading by 2, 4, 1. Spectrum News and Siena College have Mandela Barnes ahead by 1, but of the 5 and 6, actually, most recent polls, 4 of them show Ron Johnson ahead, 1 of them shows a tie, and just 1 poll shows Mandela Barnes ahead by 1 point statewide. By no means something that we could count on, expect, or treat as this ensured election for the Democratic Party, and I don't think anyone should have treated it as such as well. I will also say that in my own estimations, I have never had the Democratic Party winning. I have not recently had the Democratic Party winning the Senate race in the state of Wisconsin. The last time that was in consideration was in mid-2021 and early 2021. As we've gotten closer and closer to the election, yes, we have recognized that it has gotten closer, but honestly, I wouldn't mind walking it back because that's where I think the state of the race is right now. And that's exactly the conclusion that we can derive from this poll here that tells us, hey, Ron Johnson is ahead by 5 and Tim Michels is ahead by 3. Now, the question calls in, the poll calls into question, do I think personally that this poll is an outlier? Yes, I think it is an outlier in the sense that I don't think Ron Johnson wins by 5, but I think Ron Johnson wins. Do I think Tim Michels wins by 3? No, but I do think Tim Michels will win the election. And that's where you start to see the change in momentum and trajectory. Because this 5-point poll is one of many that are showing that Ron Johnson is leading, and while it isn't really indicating that much of an overall cultural shift when it comes down to the governor's race, it is still a shift regardless, unlike polls that we had seen previously, all of them, that had shown both Mandela Barnes leading and also Tony Evers as well. So, new polls showing the Republicans ahead, something has changed, and in favor of the GOP. But when you look at the national generic ballot, honestly speaking, not much has changed according to FiveThirtyEight, but a lot has changed according to Real Clear Politics. For about a week now, we've had the Democrats ahead, or 2 weeks now, we've had the Democrats ahead on the national generic ballot according to Real Clear Politics. In fact, nearly a month now, and then all of a sudden the Republicans pull ahead by 1 point. Now, whether or not they are accurately counting polls correctly, choosing what to negate or not, overall, I will say that this Republican +1 lead is not one that I'd stick with. I'd more so stick with the generic ballot from FiveThirtyEight. It's less fluctuating based off of just 1 or 2 polls that are thrown into the overall average. But generally speaking, things haven't improved for the Democratic Party to the extent that they should. And honestly, in the Wisconsin Senate race, they've gotten worse. The governor's race has pretty much plateaued. And I can show you that in the forecast. In the governor's race, the Democrats are on a seemingly steady decrease, Republicans on a seemingly steady increase. It's not super significant, but it is noticeable. There were times where Tony Evers had an 80% chance at re-election, and now he's down to 64%. The Republicans were at a low point at 20%, now at 36%. In the Senate race, you did see a convergence here when it came down to Wisconsin. The Democrats came exceptionally close. Republicans started out 77% chance. Today, they're at 63%. But at a different point in time, the Democrats and Republicans were at 51-49. According to the classic model at one point, in fact, you had Mandela Barnes ahead at a 61% chance of victory. And according to the light model, a 72% chance of victory. Today, now, the light model, the classic model, and the deluxe model all agree on one thing, that Ron Johnson is going to win. So when I see that, when I see these numbers released from FiveThirtyEight, when I see those numbers released when it comes down to the governor's race as well, it becomes more obvious that there is a change in trajectory. In fact, at certain points, actually, you had Tim Michels ahead in the state of Wisconsin when it came down to the polls that we had seen. But in the deluxe model was where it really mattered. The deluxe model is the most accurate version of this model, at least so we would have hoped. I actually am taking a class on election analytics, so I actually had to read the methodology behind FiveThirtyEight, and it is very interesting, and it is trustworthy. I would encourage you to do it too. It's a long document. It's back from 2020, but it is important because it tells you how these predictions are made, and the deluxe model makes a lot of sense. Looking at, though, the recent numbers from FiveThirtyEight, looking at the recent numbers from various pollsters in the state of Wisconsin, there's no question about it. The Republican Party is turning around Wisconsin. Does this mean they are turning around the nation? No. I think at the end of the day, the Democrats still are the favorites to win the Senate, but this clear and consistent trend towards the Democratic Party seems to have been momentarily halted by the Wisconsin numbers. We've also seen it in Pennsylvania, which is narrowing up in the Senate race. Honestly, we should have predicted it. I predicted it. We expected it. At least you should have expected it. Maybe not. But I think it's something that we totally should have expected, knowing our midterm environment. Things are getting real. In no reality was the Republican Party getting 32% of the vote in Pennsylvania's Senate race. In no reality was Ron Johnson getting 40% of the Senate vote in this Wisconsin Senate race. These were things that were unrealistic. And as voters get close to the election, they become more honest with their choices, and consequently, well, a lot of those closet GOP voters shift over, but we aren't seeing that happen as a uniform shift, which is why Democrats are still favored to win the Senate. That's why Democrats are increasing their chance at winning the House. The Senate and House are flip-flopping, but honestly, that's worse for the GOP because the House should be 99-1 given the environment that we expected following Glenn Youngkin's victory. That's where it should have been. The question would have been, how many seats does the GOP win over the Democrats, not if the GOP wins seats over the Democrats. That's where this really gets called into question again of what has changed versus a year ago. A lot has improved for Democrats, but Wisconsin is becoming more and more out of reach. And I think looking at the electoral history from back in 2018, well, we arrive at that conclusion. Looking at the electoral history from back in 2016, again, we arrive at that conclusion. There is a possibility that the polls are underestimating the Democratic Party in the Wisconsin governor's race. In Wisconsin in 2018, Scott Walker was tied with Tony Evers in the polls. Evers ended up winning by 1.2. Some polls, in fact, said that Walker was going to win. That did not happen. Looking at 2016, though, well, the polls said that Russ Feingold was going to win by a margin of about 3 points. He lost by 3 points. But at different points in time, Russ Feingold was leading by 11 points across the state. But the reason for the narrowing, yes, had a lot to do with Trump, but also a lot to do with Ron Johnson himself. A lot to do with the fact that also Wisconsin inherently was a close and competitive state, and in no reality was Ron Johnson getting just 40% of the vote, or quite frankly, just 44% of the vote. I won't deny that the polls and the race itself did narrow in the final 2 weeks of the campaign season. There's a lot of people you can thank for that, Comey, Hillary, etc. But looking at the Wisconsin numbers, clearly something was off about these polls. Based off the shift, at this point in time in August, Russ Feingold probably could have won. But based off the numbers that we have seen, the polls were spot on in terms of the Democratic average, but we're off in terms of the Republican average. And that's something that we need to watch when it comes down to these races. That's something that we need to watch because Mandela Barnes very well could get 47% of the vote, but that means Ron Johnson is probably getting more than 48.5. Looking at these new numbers again, all that we can draw away from this is that Republicans are doing better in Wisconsin. As much as Democrats would not like to hear that, as much as Republicans would like to hear that, though, this is confined to Wisconsin. This is not the case on the overall national numbers. Yes, the generic ballot has slightly shifted according to Real Clear Politics, not shifted at all according to 538, so there's a bit of contention there. But look around at some of these other numbers. North Carolina is tied. That should be over GOP lockdown. Shapiro and Fetterman are still leading in the state of Pennsylvania. New Hampshire, the Democrats are still leading in the Senate race. In the Georgia Senate race, the Democrats are leading according to Fox News. Brian Kemp is winning the governorship, but we expected that. Fetterman is winning the Senate race. Mastriano is losing the governor's race in Arizona. Mark Kelly is up, but the governor's race is getting more competitive. Enough on that, in the future. But looking across a lot of these polls, Colorado Senate, Colorado Governor, the Democrats ahead. Oregon will be a quite interesting thing to watch. I'm making a video on that sometime soon. But generally speaking, the Democrats aren't falling as far back behind as Wisconsin in itself would make it out to seem. There just seems to be a clear, and this also because of the fact the GOP funded millions upon millions of dollars into Wisconsin, attacking Mandela Barnes, there seems to be a positive impact for the GOP as a result of it, and you're seeing that come to fruition this November. I have betted on the Republican Party winning the state of Wisconsin for quite some time. Not literally speaking, figuratively speaking. I've put it on all of my predictions. All of my 2022 predictions, almost all of them at least. In the Senate race, I know for sure all of them. I've had the Republicans ahead. In the governor's race, I've wavered. But generally speaking, I knew this would happen. I knew this would happen, and I'm not saying this is some sort of prophetic person. I'm saying this more so because we've seen it happen before, specifically in the state of Wisconsin, and a historical overestimation of Democratic support. So when I saw numbers showing Mandela Barnes ahead by 4, yes, it was substantial, and if it had continued through November, I would have been more apprehensive. But these numbers are reaffirming the beliefs that I've held for months now that eventually Ron Johnson was going to pull ahead. That he has been lucky enough as an incumbent, and certainly has been, that he has been lucky enough as an incumbent that he will survive this race, and I think it to be true now, and I am reaffirmed by AARP, by numerous pollsters that have been in and out of the state of Wisconsin that are telling us all the same thing. So I'd closely watch this if I was a Democrat, Republican, Independent, because it is going to be an important race. It isn't going to be the most competitive race as we once might have expected. The Republicans are still likely to pull ahead in both of these races, according to my own estimations. But what am I to know? Because I could be wrong about this entirely, and that could be embarrassing. But then again, it's a question of just simple prediction and analysis and an inaccuracy by some of these polls as well. So, Wisconsin, the race to watch, Wisconsin, Senate, and governorship will be quite interesting, and altogether, I think the Democratic Party at this point in time is no longer as favored as they once were, but honestly speaking, that's not the worst case, because Wisconsin probably should have never even been on the radar for the Democrats in the Senate race. The governor's race is where they might need to worry. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.